My guest this episode is birder and photographer Chiara Talia. A walk in the park with her camera and a chance encounter with the European robin led to a passion for bird photography and an unexpected pathway to healing at a time when she was struggling with her mental health. You can hear more from Chiara in the Casual Birder Bird Club on August the 16th. Her presentation will be focusing on taking intentional, ethical and inspired bird photographs. If you're not yet a member of our virtual bird club, do sign up at the link in the episode notes. Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I'm Suzy Buttress. As a casual birder, I take pleasure in watching the wild birds around me, wherever I am. In my show, I share the joy of birding. I tell you about the birds I've seen, speak with experts and enthusiasts, go on bird outings, and I share stories from birders around the world. Last episode, longtime birder Mel Shepherd-Wells shared stories from his birding adventures, including his quest to see 50 new species in the UK for his 50th birthday. He also shares lots of birding tips. Do take a listen. I first came across Chiara Talia on Instagram, drawn in by her gorgeous bird photos. I was then entranced by her reels and stories, where she shares her experiences and photography tips. One of the things I really love about her posts is how generous she is with her knowledge. Her account quickly became one of my favourites. If I'm honest, I was also a bit envious of how well she creates her posts, sharing information in such a joyful and eye-catching way, something I would love to be able to do myself. Even if you're not into photography techniques, her beautiful photos are a joy to see, and reading the text that she posts alongside them gives an insight not only into the technical aspects of taking the photo, but also information about the bird species themselves. I was excited to speak with Chiara, to hear about her motivations, find out more about the birds she saw on her recent trip to Australia, and maybe get some Instagram tips for myself. This episode was recorded in January 2023, so bear that in mind when Chiara talks about her photography anniversary. Chiara Talia, welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I've been watching your Instagram posts and reels and stories for quite some time, and I absolutely love them. You're a photographer, you're a birder, and you travel. And I want to be like you. Could you tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you got into photography?
Yes, of course. So perhaps my accent is very clear, perhaps not, but I'm originally Italian. Although I now live in Belgium, but I spent quite a few years moving around Europe. So I also lived in the UK for a while, in the Netherlands, but now I'm settled in Belgium. But I do love to travel. That's absolutely true. And for photography, I actually started 3 years and 3 days ago. I have an exact date for it because I marked on my calendar the day I took my first bird photo. And that's pretty much also when I started with photography. The beginning of my photography was actually not in very happy circumstances, but I do like to tell this story. It's very important to me. I started photography when I was struggling with my mental health. So I had something that is called generalized anxiety disorder. So basically it's this condition where the anxiety is really pronounced throughout the day and related to many things in your daily life. So in that period, I had to work a lot on myself, of course. I had to take a break from work. And I just thought that was a good idea to just start something new, something for myself. Mainly, I was looking really for something to distract myself from the struggle. And then I randomly remembered that I owned a camera. So I had an old Canon that I actually bought years earlier. I remember that I bought that camera before moving to Scotland because I thought, yeah, it would be nice. I go to Scotland. It's such a wonderful country. It would be good to take photos there. But then I ended up really never using this camera. I remember I watched some YouTube tutorials, the typical tutorials that you look for, how to use your camera, how to switch from auto to manual mode. After watching a few tutorials, okay, I'll just give it a go. And I just went to the park where I used to walk, because I have to say that one of the few things that was helpful in that period was just walking in the nature. And that's something that I've always done in my life. So I just went to this park, which was close to where I was living. And the initial intention was to take photos of flowers, because I thought, yeah, that would be easy to start with. It's a static subject and they're colorful, they're nice. But then when I was walking in the park, a gray squirrel just started to climb a tree. So my attention was just randomly caught and I took a photo of the gray squirrel. But then when I was looking at the gray squirrel, just with the corner of my eye, I could see a very small thing jumping on the ground, and it was a European robin. And it was clearly checking on me. I took this photo of the European robin, and I just remember that in that moment, I really just asked myself, how can such a small creature be so brave? He was, completely bold, as only European robins can be. He was checking on me. That encounter literally changed my life. I remember I went home. I started to see this photo. I mean, I knew it was a robin, even if I really had no knowledge about birds. The robin, I think, is a bird that most of the people are familiar with, even if you're not really into birds. So somewhat I knew that I met a European robin. But basically, from that moment onwards, I just started to think about birds. I started learning about them and walking, looking for birds, always with my camera. And yeah, that's how I started bird photography. And it's always been birds. So from the very first moment, I never changed.
That's amazing. I can't believe you've only been doing this 3 years. You've clearly got an innate skill for the photography, and you've obviously got an artistic eye for being able to view the birds in the way that you do. But what a heartwarming, it's brought a little tear to my eye, because I get very emotional very quickly.
No, but it's very emotional also for me. But actually, it's something that I only recently opened up about on my Instagram page. I mean, I've always told the story that everything started with this European robin, and this is because I'm quite obsessed with European robin. I have a bracelet with it on now, because it just means so much for me, and it's much beyond just being the start of my bird photography. I really feel that meeting that single bird really completely changed the path in my healing journey. And having birds then during that year of recovery has been really life-changing.
It just touches me so much to hear that. So many people find comfort in nature and find a peace of mind and just inspiration from nature. What were your interests before that day when everything changed?
Well, I feel that really I always had something for nature. So I actually grew up in the countryside. So always surrounded by nature, by animals. I used to live literally in the middle of nowhere. Also, my kind of passion for animals, it's what brought me to study veterinary medicine. So that's where my education is. But then after my graduation, I just went on another career path. I went into research, so kind of outside from nature and the animal world. So I really feel that, yeah, I went too far from that, but that actually has been always a very big part of me. What I was just doing, it was really just walking in the parks, and I knew that that was really refreshing for me. But I always felt I was missing something. I felt I didn't have a big passion in my life. And I remember, this might sound bad, but I remember I've always been jealous of seeing these people, so driven, people loving something so much. And I just didn't have that. And then I found birds, and now I feel I have that too. So I'm so grateful for that now.
That is so wonderful to hear. The passion clearly comes through in the way that you share your experiences, the birds that you see, and that you clearly want to help others feel those same experiences. So you share how you take your photographs, you share about the birds that you see. It's all about, this is what I've seen, but you can do this too. And this is how. And that's what I really like about it. It's really enabling. And even though your photos are absolutely fantastic, it doesn't put me off. It's not like I think, well, I can never do that. It's like, maybe one day I could do that. So you started off then with the robin. what led you to find out about, because I can imagine having a great passion for robins, as you say, they can be very bold. They're amazingly friendly to people, and not so friendly to each other. And
then I learned that, of course,
yes.
yes. So at a point I started wondering, oh my God, maybe I should really not have chosen the robin as my spirit animal.
In order to take the photographs you take, you do have to study the birds that you're looking at. It's not just like there's a robin, I'll take you kind of have to watch for that moment that feels the right moment.
I think that it's a fundamental aspect of bird photography to study birds. I really like to study. So I really started to go deep. So I studied bird biology from A to Z. I actually would like to go back to uni at a point to formalize my knowledge because it's something that I really like. I think that having knowledge about bird behavior and what to expect is actually very important and makes all the difference when it comes to photography. And actually, I think that a big change when going from, more beginner phase to a more aware phase of photography is really like the planning of your photos. So, of course, I clearly remember that in my first days in photography, of course, I was just going around with my camera and I was taking photos of whatever was happening. But that's perfect. That's how it's good to start because you just have to learn. First of all, I had to learn how to recognize birds because my knowledge was really zero. So I was just taking photos of every bird because, of course, also having a photo then helps because you can go back at home, open your photos, check in those, and then identify the birds. So that was a very important step. But then only photography wise, the other step is, of course, to plan for the photos. So this means going to some places when the conditions are in a certain way. For example, one of the things that I learned I like the most is to take photos of birds in the fog at sunrise. So it took me a long time to find a suitable location because, of course, you have to find a spot that is good enough. So a spot that it's accessible, a spot where the birds are around, because otherwise without subjects, you can't get a bird photo. And then you just have to wait for the conditions to happen. So, of course, it depends. It's not always common that you have fog at sunrise because, it depends on a certain level of humidity, on the wind level. So it took me several early morning sessions before I actually got to see the scenes as I pictured them in my head. So there's also lots of trying to visualize the photo that you want to take before it happens in the way that then when the subject is there, when the conditions are there, you immediately recognize it and then you're ready to take the photo.
So on the one hand, I guess you took a lot of landscape photos while you were waiting for the birds to turn up, or you were waiting for the fog conditions, but still checking out those locations. But I guess the other thing is that you've been learning over the time of taking all the photographs that you've been taking, you've been learning how to actually use your camera so that, as you said, you're not just using auto all the time, that you know what those conditions mean, what lighting you need to account for, and being able to focus on the bird and not a reed nearby or something like that, which is, I'm still at the phase of trying to get that bit.
But it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I really think that it's like having two different subjects you have to study at the same time. So from one side, you have the bird side. So really focusing on, learning more about birds, their behavior, what they're doing, their breeding. And then on the other side, there's more the technical side, which is the photography side that, of course, also needs some study on their own. So really more on the technical level on how to use the camera.
Yes, that can be quite daunting sometimes.
It surely can.
And I must just ask you, how ruthless are you in deleting the photographs that you've taken that aren't quite good?
I am quite. I have to say that also that's a big change that you can see while progressing, or at least something that I started to notice by myself. So every now and then I recheck of my archive. And when I go back at photos that I've taken that I kept back then, now I really question my judgment. But it's normal. It's fine. Of course, now I have other eyes. I have other expectations in regards of the photos that I want to achieve. So of course, those are not the same. So what made me happy, I don't know, 1 year ago will not make me happy today, and that's fine. It's normal. It's part of progress. But I can say that before I was much more careful in deleting stuff, because I don't know, there was much more attachment. Like, oh my God, what if this is the last semi-decent photo that I took of this bird? Whereas now I think maybe I'm just more comfortable and say, yeah, no, I'll just delete this one. I know that I can work on these. I know that I can get a better one in the next session.
I certainly haven't got that yet. Although I can see myself moving more towards what you're talking about, because, I've gone through the phases of just taking photos just in case I can't identify the bird, or, I quite liked what it looked like in that moment, but it wasn't sharp. And I've kept it anyway because, well, it's a case of that bird doing that thing on that time. And I noticed when I was in Antarctica, I took thousands and thousands of photographs, which
can imagine. Wow.
And I'm gradually going through them now. It's taken such an age to go through them, because I'm not very good at doing it on the back of the camera. My husband is a photographer, well, his passion is photography, and he's just moving into like bird photography, but he's a landscape photographer. And he's much more that he will look at the back of the camera and he can tell straight away if he's managed it or not. But I can't quite see. I need a bigger screen to get the real feel. But then that just takes hours and hours, because then I go through that filter thing of, well, that's not brilliant, but, it's probably the last time I'm going to see that bird, so I'll keep it. How do you manage your photos? What's your process?
Yeah, it's actually something that I really want to work on, because I also feel my process is not very efficient at the moment. So as I said, I make two kind of selections actually, because I shoot in RAW, but also JPEGs. So every photo, it's in two formats. But then what I do is that for the RAW files, I really keep only the ones that are really, really good, in my opinion, of course. So it's a really, really low percentage. I want to be clear. I think that this is something that I get asked many times, because it's easy on social media, just scrolling. Of course, on social media, everyone just posts, let's say, the best that we have. But I think that we have to be honest, that's really just a small percentage of all the photos that I take. So when it comes to the RAW, I'll just delete the vast amount of the photos that I take in one session, and I'll just take really just the ones that I'll process further. So those are the ones that I actually import on Lightroom, and I actually do a full edit on those, and are the ones that eventually will end on my Instagram feed. For the rest of the photos also there, I try just to keep the ones that, even though are not good enough to be on my Instagram feeds, or that I don't like that much, I still keep them, because I'm not just a photographer. I also like to say that I am a birder, and the two things do not go together. So there are many people who are just purely bird photographers, and then I know there are people who are just birder. I think that I am a bit of an in-between figure. So I would also collect and just keep photos that I know are not good enough, so they will never end on a magazine or somewhere else. But I think that they are relevant, just because, I don't know, it's maybe a bird that it's rare. So that really might be, the only time in my life that I see it. So of course I want to keep a record of it. Or in other cases, I also like just to keep, as you say, to document particular behaviors. So the photo can be not necessarily great from the technical perspective level. I don't know, maybe the light was just, awful, but perhaps it's an interaction and it's very interesting. So I'll also keep that photo. And also those photos I think are very useful, because those also I'll end up sharing maybe in another format. They will not be on my Instagram feed, but I use them, I don't know, for the stories or for the videos when I try to talk about particular birds or specific behaviors. So it's more for the information education part about birds, that material still is relevant.
That's really, really interesting to hear that. So the main posts that you have on Instagram, they're your processed showcase photographs. And then the other photographs, if they've got some aspect that's of interest, but they weren't necessarily the best photograph, they can be a teaching aid or something like that.
Yeah.
I really like that, actually. I really like that idea. My husband's always saying to me I should shoot in RAW, I did look at that, but it takes up such a lot of space, and I know that I take a lot of rubbish.
Yeah, like memory is a huge problem. Like, especially now, I recently switched to a new camera, and that camera just produces super large file. So they're like twice as heavy as my previous camera. So this is also why I really have now to be mindful with the raw files. So I will just delete whatever. And if something is nice, I will just keep the JPEGs anyway. So this is how I do it for now.
I noticed that you're on your Instagram page, it says that you're the Canon Young Talent for 2021.
Yeah, there was actually a very nice surprise. So in 2021, I was actually just starting out. It's just what was just 1 year. There was this kind of contest organized by Canon Belgium, because as I said, I was living here. And then I was selected as a young talent. There was a photo conference in Brussels where there were many exhibitions, but there was also talks, and it was like also a photography fair. So we were invited to talk at the Canon site. So I gave this presentation about my photography, and the idea was just like the aim of this initiative was actually to inspire other people. So, other young people, but every people. So I remember that I made this presentation and I gave 10 reasons why you should start bird photography. I'm very grateful for that opportunity. That in that way, it was, I think, the first time that I started to have more confidence about what I was doing, because as I mentioned before, I was really struggling with anxiety, and a part of it was very low self-esteem and confidence. To even just start showing up on social media, I did it because there was this part of me that really wanted to share, because I had so much joy in my heart that it was just too much. I had to share it with other people. But then there was also this part of me that was very much insecure about what I was doing. Everyone has this more negative inner voice saying, what you're doing, like your photos are no good. No one is going to look at your photos, always maybe comparing with other people who are, much further in their journey in photography. So I had all these obstacles, but as I said, my joy was just too much. So I decided just to go. I opened the Instagram page, and I was just showing up with my photos every day. Then it took much longer to actually also show up personally with my face. Also, that was another step. I remember I did my first ever story talking when I was, it was winter, with a hat, a scarf. So you could barely see me because I was so insecure. But I remember that was the first story that I made, actually talking at the camera. So then when, after about a year that I was doing it, I was selected. I mean, it was not a big achievement. I mean, it's not, a super international thing, but it really, really meant a lot, because it was like, oh, look, someone is just looking at what I'm doing. And it was, a recognition. And it was actually very important, because it kind of then boosted a bit my self-confidence. So then it was a bit easier after that to go ahead with what I was doing on social media.
Having that validation by others, objectively saying that, your work is really good, we're really enjoying it. And as I've said, your Instagram account is one of the joys of looking at Instagram.
Thanks so much.
Beautiful photos, you learn something, and you get to see these lovely places that you've gone. You've just come back from Australia, and I would love to ask you about your trip there, how you planned for it, and how you got your target birds.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that you've also been to Slovenia to do some very interesting photography of birds.
So last summer, I was able to finally go to Slovenia. And I went there for a very specific reason, because I had a dream, and this dream was to try floating hide photography. So for whoever is not very familiar with the term, a floating hide is a floatable device, and it's a hide. So you have a tent on top of you, and it's basically another approach that you can use for photography. Of course, it's very useful for water birds. So basically you would walk into water bodies normally with, shallow water. So you are still standing up, and then you can just move this hide on top of you. So you have a full camouflage tent that will hide you from the birds. I came to know floating hide photography, just on social media. Otherwise, I would have never known. So I randomly saw that there was this thing. It's not extremely popular because, of course, you can understand the device itself cost a bit, and then you have to have a suitable location. It's not a matter of, just randomly walking in a lake or in a river. So it's not done everywhere. And also in many countries, there are strict regulations about accessing water bodies. So this was actually an organized trip for photographers. So it was actually my first trip that I joined. That was also very nice because it was the first time that I was actually with other bird photographers. So it was a nice shared experience. It was just a small group of us. It was just 6, and we went to try the floating hide. It was a full week, very intense, because we were going for a sunrise session. So we were actually getting in the water before the sunrise, so in the complete darkness. That was also very fun to be in the middle of a lake in the complete darkness, waiting for the sun to rise. And then it was, a full 3-4 hour session in the morning. Then it was too harsh light. It was in the summer anyway. And then we were going back to have another session at sunset. And that was really, honestly, an absolute dream, because with the floating hide, I was able to get so close to birds. That was something that I thought it could never be possible. But I learned then doing it that there are some bird species that just don't care at all about the floating hide. So it's a bit like you're just perceived as an object. Of course, you have to move not very quickly, because otherwise they will be scared anyway. So you need, a careful approach, or just testing out how close you can get to the bird without scaring it. But I was really able to I could almost touch some of the birds. If I wanted, I could have just, put my hand outside, and I was that close. And for me, it was really a dream, because water birds are among my favorite birds. So those are the species that I think I go to photograph more often. So being so close to so many of them for a full week, it was so intense. And I can clearly say that on my last session there, I just cried a lot.
Oh.
Because it was such an experience. I was just so grateful. Of course, I was sad that it was about to end, but I was just so grateful that I got to live that. So I would advise everyone who likes water birds to look for a floating high photography adventure.
What birds did you most enjoy photographing there?
So I think that the most amazing thing were the little bitterns there. I could see many, mainly juveniles, but also adults. And the little bitterns were among the ones that really didn't care at all about the floating hide. So I could get super close. So the idea that you're able to get close to birds that normally, are so secretive in their ways of living was just, mind blowing, honestly. Because for once, you're just on the other side. When you just normally walk around the lake, you have the lake, and maybe you have the reed beds, and then you never know what's going on the side of the reed beds, because just you don't have views there. But then with the floating hide, you're actually on the right side, and you can see all the action.
How did you protect your cameras from the water?
That's a good question. Actually, the floating hides are very well built. You have like a piece of metal in front of you, and then you can attach the tripod head. So then the camera just goes on the tripod head. So it's actually pretty safe. Of course, the more critical moment is the moment you get in the water and you have to attach the camera on the tripod head. That's when things can happen. But I think that once the camera is attached on the tripod head, you are quite comfortable in just moving around, because the camera is just there. It's very stable. Of course you can drop things. I think I was dropping my mobile in the water. So I don't have many videos taken there, because it was, it was a risk every time just to record something with the mobile. But otherwise the camera was pretty safe. Then of course you have the rain cover just to cover from water drops or whatever may be there. But it's been amazing. Actually, a few sessions were under the rain, and that was still perfect because you're under a tent, and anyway, you're wet already because you are in a lake. So that was actually very nice too, like to have, photos in the rain.
Oh, wow. Yes, because I can imagine that would have given you some of those environmental conditions that you like, with the almost like fog, but a view of looking through the rain at the birds.
And then, of course, the other important thing, the very positive aspect of doing floating height photography is that you're really water level. So one of the most important tips for everyone who's doing bird photography is try to get eye level with the birds, right? Then, of course, for birds in the water, it means that you have to be water level. That's something that is hard in many cases, just because most of the locations are just not accessible. You can't just go water level, but then with the floating height, you're exactly water level because your camera is just a few centimeters above the water. So you get that really nice blurring of the background with the bird really standing up in the photo.
No, as soon as my husband hears this episode, he'll be like, right, we've got to book one of these holidays.
Hello and welcome to the Wildlife Community Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie, and each episode I'll be bringing you conversations with other people who are passionate about connecting people and nature. Join me as we delve into discussions about wildlife, share top tips, and inspire you to transform your local areas into thriving natural havens, and above all, helping you to make your space a wild one.
And now you've just come back from Australia.
Yes.
We went to Australia a couple of years ago. So I've been a birder all my life, but I've been a very, very much kind of solo birder that just sees birds that are around me and doesn't necessarily look for specific birds and didn't really have the tools to know how to do that. So we went to Australia, I think it was 2016. So it was before I had the show, because since I've had the show, my birding has increased amazingly because my knowledge and my abilities have really increased. But also I didn't have the tools available to me. So like we've just been to Antarctica, and on the way down, we were stopping at different places. And what we did was we used eBird to look at the hotspots in the areas we were going to for the month of the year, so that, we could look at past years worth of that month and see what birds were likely that had been seen by other people. And then we looked in guidebooks for those birds to read up about them so we could be familiar. So when I went to Australia, it was very much like, oh my God, there's a bird over there. What is it? And I don't know, but let's take a photograph and hopefully I can identify it. We did have a guidebook, but the birds are fleeting and you're not quite sure what you're going to see. And what that meant was I missed out on looking for specific birds because I didn't necessarily know they were found in that area. That the information I had was quite patchy. And, a guidebook will say, yes, it's found in this region. And, you don't know if that whole region, if that bird will be found specifically where you are. So if I was going again, I would do a lot more research because the tools are now available to me. I didn't know about eBird then and things like that. Now, I've been watching your stories that you've been doing about being in Australia, and you clearly had target birds you wanted to see while also just really enjoying the whole thing. How did the trip come about? How did you choose Australia? How did you choose which areas to go?
So, actually, it's quite funny because I ended up in Australia, but that was not really my plan. I mean, in my list of countries that I wanted to visit, Australia did not figure in the top 10, I think. But I had to go there because I was invited for a wedding there. So this is why I went to Australia. And then, of course, as I was traveling there, I said, I'll also take the opportunity to bird there. But this means also that I was completely unaware because it was never, in my bucket list to do, at least not in the short term. But of course, immediately as I knew that I was going there, I started my preparation. So I bought the bird guides. I started studying using the available resources as the ones that you mentioned. So I also heavily used eBird. I've also used iNaturalist because I find that there people tend to put better the location. On eBird, you just have the hotspot, whereas on iNaturalist, you are forced to have the exact location. So for some of the birds, it was then easier in that way to track some of the targets. And then something that I've also used a lot were actually Facebook groups. So before traveling there, I just joined a series of Facebook groups, birding groups mainly, because it just gives you a good idea on what's going in there, the locals, what they're saying, where they're going, what they see more often with people putting photographs. So that was also a very good way to help me in the preparation. But then in terms of the planning itself, as I said, I had to go to Melbourne for the wedding. So that was kind of my fixed point. So I stayed in the city, and it was more urban birding, but still very good. But then I really also just wanted to have a trip within the trip. And it's there that I decided to go to far North Queensland. So I took a plane 3 hours from Melbourne because, what I learned is that really in Australia, the distances are just enormous, which is something I'm not used to coming from Europe, where almost everything is so close. I mean, 3 hours flight is possibly one of the longest distance that you can fly from one country to another. So I just picked then far North Queensland just because based on what I was reading and when I was studying, it looks like one of really the best hotspots for endemic birds. So I went there for 1 full week, which was really amazing. And then I also had a few other days spare in my trip. It was not super long. It was 3 weeks in total, which might sound long, but it's actually not for such a big place as Australia. And then considering that I also had the wedding, so of course I had to juggle around. It was not just a nature trip for me, but still I was able also to cut on a few extra days. And for those extra days, I decided to head to Tasmania. And in that case, I picked Tasmania just because it was a much shorter flight from Melbourne. It's just 1 hour. But because I stayed there just literally 2 days and a half, I really specifically went on a small island in Tasmania. So it's funny to think that I was in Australia, which is a continent, it's an island. But then I went to Tasmania, which is another island. But actually, I visited an island of Tasmania. And I spent there also 2 days and a half, because also there, my main target was, of course, to find the endemics of Tasmania. So Tasmania has 12 endemic species. And in those 2 days, I was able to find 11 out of 12. So I think still quite nice number.
What was the island that you stayed on?
South Bruni.
Ah, right. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because we went to Tasmania as well, but we didn't have enough time to stay.
You went to the
really
north,
travel
maybe?
around. Well, we did go to a couple of different locations, but we were there for a week, but we couldn't quite work in being able to go off to South Bruni. And I did see that as one of the options, but it didn't quite work out for us. So you clearly had some target birds you wanted to see. I'm sure that you saw lots of birds that weren't necessarily targets, but just brought a whole lot of joy to you to see them and to see their behavior, their interactions. But what are some of the top birds that you saw while you were there?
Honestly, I had so many encounters. And of course, when you travel to a part of the world which is so far away from yours, every bird will be new. I think I counted about 200 species in total that I've seen in Australia. And of these, I think that 190 were new. So the rest, the other 10 were, I don't know, either introduced species, unfortunately, or birds that can be found also in Europe. So literally, I could look everywhere and find a new bird. But I have to say that the birds of tropical Queensland really stole my heart. And in particular, I remember the first day when I arrived there, I stayed in a cottage in the rainforest. So it was really a really nice accommodation in the middle of the rainforest. And I had this private cottage with a veranda, and the birds and the other wildlife were just visiting the veranda. And on the same day that I arrived, I think I arrived around 4 p.m. I've already received the visit of the Victoria's rifle birds. So that was just so great. I mean, I remember I was seeing, studying the bird guide and the videos and whatever, but it looked so far away, the possibility to see a bird of paradise in my life. And then like the first day there, they were just there visiting me daily. And I spent lots of time there. And well, of course, the male is so beautiful. It's all black with the green iridescent feathers. And it was so funny because the way it flaps its wing is so particular. So the sound that it produces, like you could hear him coming around just because of the specific wing flapping that he made. So that was really, really amazing encounter. So that was kind of easy to see. The one that really I had to struggle more was the Southern Cassowary. That was quite sad actually, because I was really getting frustrated. I know that as birders, you say they're birds, they're wild animals. It can happen, but it can also not happen. And I know that. I mean, I had that already many times, just going to a place, with a target, because I don't know, all the other people apparently saw that bird there, but then it just doesn't happen for you. It's part of what we do. But then when I was there and I was, keeping walking in this rainforest, and based on what I was reading around, like many people just saw this bird like randomly driving the car because they just, crossed the road. So for many people, it's really a random encounter, and many described it as a very easy encounter. But then after a few days there and no sighting, I was getting frustrated, because I was getting the thought, what if I traveled all the way here and I didn't see this bird, which is, is a bit of maybe a symbol of that area of Australia. But then my luck changed on my last day. Well, it's not just a matter of luck. It's also a matter of really wanting to find it, because actually my last day, I had something else planned. I was supposed to go again out in the ocean for more of a relaxing day on the beach and snorkeling, because that's also the area of the Great Barrier Reef. But because I still really wanted to see the cassowary, I canceled the boat trip and I decided to just try it out in another location. So cancel that plan, just drive to another site that was completely off my itinerary, or was on the other side where I was supposed to go. But I went there and I've seen at the end 3 Southern Cassowaries. So it was worth it. But yeah, I really had to, struggle a lot before finding one.
That's amazing. And I was watching along because you posted over a couple of days, didn't you, about what your experience was trying to find this cassowary. And it's like, oh, let me know. Did you get it? Did you?
Yes.
That was very teasing of you, but it kept me interested.
It was literally last minute. I mean, I was due to fly on that day. So I had my flight on that evening, and that was my last morning. So I said, that's it. Like, this is my last chance. If it happens now, if it will, otherwise, I don't know, maybe I'll never come back in this place again. I don't know, maybe I will, but it's so far away. So it would have been really a shame to leave Australia without seeing a Southern Cassowary. But eventually I did. I think that, perseverance is a big element of birding.
I really admire the fact that you tried several times and you tried different ways. You didn't just give up, which is, it can be one of the ways you deal with it. It's just like, oh, well, I'm never going to see one. But you used the last few minutes of your journey to see it. So I'm so pleased for you that you did. I would just quickly like to ask you a little bit about the sort of tools of the trade, or maybe some secrets behind the posts. You mentioned that you have like your main Instagram post, then you've got your reels and stories. What's your process for thinking about those?
I really don't think that there are secrets out there. There are strategies. That's true. So personally, I follow several people who are kind of social media strategists. It's like a bit learning what are the tools of photography, learning what are the tools for birding, and there you have to learn the tools of social media. So that's a big part of it. In terms of what works, I think that consistency is key on social media. So I must say that I've been quite consistent during my 2.5 years on Instagram. It's been changing a lot during time. I think that I had periods where I post every day. There are also periods that I just take a break, honestly, because sometimes I feel I just need it. So I really want to enjoy what I'm doing. What I try to do is at least post a story every day, because it's just really, I think, the best way to connect with people. Because at the end, the reason why I share what I share is for the people. I am not getting anything out of it. I do it just for the simple, pure joy of sharing. And what's wonderful is that anyway, even if you're looking through a screen, you're able to create human connections. So I know that actually a big part of social media is just being attracted by these beautiful things without necessarily knowing anything about it. But you will just see it. It's, I don't know, it's a beautiful bird, and you will just double click the like just because it's a beautiful picture. It's just my personal approach that for me, that's just not enough. I want people to be able to take something else from my post. This is why I never just post the photo, but then there's always either information about the bird, or in other cases, it's just more about a behind the scenes. So maybe I just describe how did I take that photo, because that's also something that people, enjoy reading, or maybe they can learn something new. And then another part of the posting is just resources and tools. So those are, now I do them more in the reels format. So it's really just giving tips and tools to people. And something that now I've started doing more recently is some kind of storytelling via videos, which is something that I really enjoy, because sometimes I feel, I experience all these, I call them adventures. So for me, every day that I go birding, that's an adventure. And I also think that it's more authentic in the way that you really share what you're doing, because I think that one of the big thing that I really want to bring on my Instagram is the real behind the scenes of what it looks like to be a bird photographer and a birder. Because again, I understand that everyone just wants to post their best photos, but I also remember myself when I was just starting out, I was really asking myself, how can these people always take these wonderful photos? Oh my God, they are so good. Then it means that I'm so bad because I just can't. So I just want to be, honest out there to say, yeah, these are the photos that I take, and yeah, they're good. But yeah, I have also days where I just go around outside and I don't see anything, or I just don't have a single good photo. So I just hope, that people can relate more to the reality, rather than maybe, this more fake perfection that is so easy to fall upon in social media.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show, Chiara. I've admired your Instagram account for some time, but to find out that in person you're in person by Zoom, but you're sort of so full of joy and love about the birds, and that you really love sharing. And honestly, it's been an absolute joy speaking with you. So would you like to just say where people can find you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Suzy. Well, first of all, I really want to thank you. It's been amazing. I do love talking about birds. So it's great to have the chance to get to talk. And I also so much appreciate the work that you do, because as also a content creator, I know how hard it is and how much it takes, and everything is for free. So also, thanks so much for what you're doing. And yeah, I mostly can be found daily on my Instagram account. So I am at Chiara Talia _birds. I do also have a website, although I have to re-update it, but it's chiaratalia.com. But there I also plan to write blogs on my Australia trip, because I really want to share more about the itinerary and what I've done. So hopefully people can just use my itinerary to make theirs for their future travels. I would love that.
The links to Chiara's Instagram page and her website are in the episode notes. Do check them out. And don't forget, next week in our virtual bird club, Chiara will be giving her presentation on taking intentional, ethical and inspired bird photographs. It would be lovely to have you come along. You'll be able to ask her questions and also meet up with other members of the bird club. The link for joining is in the episode notes. Whenever I'm out birding and stop to talk to people, if they've given me good tips or we've shared an experience like seeing a bird together, I like to give them a shout out on the show. And I'm a bit behind in my shout outs, but here are the recent ones. At Iworth Pond in the New Forest, I met Lucy and Emily. They stopped to see what we were looking at, and John had just spotted a cuckoo land on a tree stump. It's one of the few times that I've seen a cuckoo out in the open. So we stood for some time watching that and chatting about birds. A couple of weekends later, we went to Farnham Heath and met Chris from Camberley there. We had just seen a lifer woodlark and pointed out to Chris where he could find it. Chris was also looking for Dartford warbler, which I'm pretty certain I also saw that day. Merlin had certainly picked up the song, and I had seen some dark, long-tailed birds flitting amongst the gorse, and they looked to me very characteristic of Dartford warbler. Unfortunately, I didn't see one perched on top of the gorse, which is my preferred viewing of them. Chris very kindly shared some details about another site nearby called Putnam Common, which we still haven't had a chance to visit, but maybe we'll be able to do this weekend. It was very nice to see that Chris joined our Facebook group after chatting with us, so thanks for doing that, Chris. It's nice to have you with us. This past weekend, John and I went down to Seaford in East Sussex. Rona in the Casual Birder Bird Club had mentioned going there herself to see kittiwakes, and I had no idea that you could find kittiwakes in the south of England. So we decided to have a little weekend down there, and the Saturday was absolutely terrible. We had a really big storm in the UK, and on the south coast it meant we had high winds, lots of really, really heavy rain and heavy seas, and if you were outside the car for any length of time, you got absolutely soaked, as John did. But you could sit in the car on the seafront, looking out to sea, and between windscreen wipers washing the windscreen clear, we could see kittiwakes out to sea. We also managed to see some gannets, and I saw a couple of northern former, and all those birds were first of year ones for us. We also saw a couple of formations of dark birds flying past. They weren't cormorants, the necks were much shorter, and we thought that they might be common scoter, but we weren't absolutely sure because we've only had limited views of those. And honestly, the view through the windscreen was pretty poor. The next day, Sunday, was an absolutely gorgeous day, still quite breezy, but blue skies, clouds, and much, much warmer. And we went back down to the seafront before leaving Seaford to head home. While there, we got some much better views of the kittiwakes. I could even hear them through the wind, and I love hearing the sound of kittiwakes. They sound like they're saying, "Kittiwake, kittiwake." We got talking to Claire and John, and Claire had some wonderful tips about the local area and told us that there had been reports of common scoter the previous day, so that made us much more confident about what we'd seen. But it also turned out that Claire was the chair of the Sussex Ornithological Society. That was really great that she was doing the outreach of talking to people and telling them what can be seen there. And she gave us some great tips about other places where we could go while there. Unfortunately, we were running out of time, but we're definitely going to go back there. It looks like a great location, and you can go up onto the big chalk downs. Hopefully we'll get a chance to go back later on in the autumn. And a shout out to Brendan and Julia, who we met on the seafront while I was doing some filming with my new vlogging rig. They stopped to chat to us about the town, which they'd moved to a few years ago, and they called Seaford the South Coast's best kept secret. Oops, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that we went there. I love hearing your stories about the birds you're seeing, and sometimes being out birding means you get to see or hear other animals. John from Hampshire sent me this tale of a chilling sound he heard while out birding. Oh, and side note, John from Hampshire is my husband.
Hello Suzy, this is John from Hampshire. Just walking back to my car. It's about 10:15 at night. Really starting to get quite dark now. I'm out at this time, having just finished the last of my BTO, British Trust for Ornithology, woodcock surveys. Unfortunately, I've drawn a blank on the woodcock. None seen or heard, so that's a shame. But just thought I would let you know about quite a strange thing that happened towards the end of my survey. At about 10:05, a really strange noise startled me, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A sort of strange sound, somewhere between a bark and a yell, I would say, repeated every few seconds in otherwise completely silent conditions. So really quite surprising when it started up. It started up at about 10:05. It kept going every few seconds until I started my walk back to the car, which I'm on now. So whatever it was, didn't like me being there. It shut up as soon as I started taking a few steps away from the survey site where I was looking out for the woodcock. So that's I guess a couple of 100 yards or so behind me now. It's nice and silent again now, but really strange experience, really unusual sound. I'm attaching the sound recording so you and the listeners can hear it. Be interested to know what people make of it. I won't give the game away, but I will give the game away. I think it's the sound of a slightly upset roe deer. See what your listeners make of it.
Well, that would have freaked me out if I'd been standing in the woods at night, listening and watching for woodcock and hearing that instead. Do tell me about your bird sightings, or maybe the things you've heard while out birding. You can leave me a voicemail or send me a message on my website, casualbirder.com. Personal recommendation is a powerful way to help others find the show. If you like what you hear, give the show a shout out on social media, or tell a friend to listen. You can also support the show's production by buying me a virtual coffee on ko-fi.com. The link is in the episode notes. My thanks to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by The Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder podcast.